I think the early exposure, particularly the way I experienced it, just stumbling across it, I was at a relative's home and happened to stumble across pornography. It was a torn up, shredded sort of pieces of this smut magazine, and here I come along, 9 years old, and I find it. And I wouldn't say that that necessarily predisposed me to to some sort of an addiction to pornography, but it certainly opened my eyes to a world that I was not aware of till that point. And so, and I think it's the story of perhaps every young male in America. At some point, there's this encounter with this thing, and you know that it's wrong, or you know that it isn't, it's bad or something, and then there's another episode where you encounter it again, and that was my case too. The next time it would be at another place, and I would find a Playboy magazine, and there were just these times in which I was discovering this other world, kind of this dark world. I guess just a part of growing up, and I've heard stories of how people have found pornography on the side of the road, out in the woods. Kids bring it to school. And I would eventually go through that same process. I would encounter it in these different areas. And then there comes a time in which I think you hit adolescence or puberty, and the pictures, they elicit a certain pleasure. I mean, you just kind of get drawn into it, and it becomes something that you desire for yourself now. That was kind of the early journey of encountering pornography. And as I grew and got into high school and on into college, there still seemed to be these little encounters with it. And again, I never had the sex talk as a kid, so I'm learning about sexuality, through this whole process too. And no one sat me down and given me the talk. I'm just kind of wading through this very powerful force on my own, and pornography becomes a part of this, And so my eyes were open to so much more, and yet at the same time there's this internal spiritual struggle because, man, I don't want to, this can't be good. God, I know this is bad. And it seems like the focus of all my prayers and my spiritual devotional life is that, God, can you forgive me for this? What's wrong with me? Why can't I stop this? Because I'm being drawn into this now, and lust and fantasy are kind of the problems for I'm a teenage kid, but still I have it's becoming a real source of shame. I don't want to tell anybody about it because people, they see me as a good guy and a solid guy. I don't want to ruin that. And so really it would go on that way, just this personal, private, secret sin. And the problem would become is that it would just increase in intensity. And so when there was free time, when there was downtime, I would go looking for pornography myself. And once I became of age where I could go and rent a video or purchase pornography legitimately, it was a natural kind of outlet for kind of that sexual tension and so forth. And I don't know what it was about me, but I always felt like I couldn't disappoint anyone. I did not want to disappoint anyone. In fact, I was determined that I was just going to be a real responsible guy that was going to do things right. And perhaps some of this stems from the fact that I had a lot of resentment towards my father over the divorce situation, and I felt like, man, he gave up his responsibility of taking care of us. And I think those are some of the deeper issues that were going on. But I had determined I would never let anyone down. So this would, there's no way anyone could ever find out about this. And so I just buried it, just kept burying it, hoping, secretly, privately, praying to God, take this away from me. And, every altar call, I was the guy going forward because, God, I need you to take this away. And I would think, God, this is it. This is it. It's going to go away now. And it wouldn't go away. And as I entered ministry, graduated, during my college years, I met and fell in love with a wonderful woman. She would become my wife. I wanted to tell her, and I couldn't get up enough courage to do that. And like so many men, I felt like, well, once I get married and sexually, I could legitimately fulfill those urges, won't be a problem. And that wasn't the case. Like so many men out there know, that wasn't the case. And I fell right back into that pattern of hiding and lying and praying and that secret sin over here. That I had this secret sexual life on the side with pornography that my wife was unaware of. And I didn't want to let her know. I was terrified of her ever finding out, of anyone ever finding out. My wife and I would eventually go to seminary, and I would finish a Master's of Divinity degree, and it was actually during that time, that was probably the most intense time in which pornography really began to take the form of an addiction for me. This time in which I'm supposed to be so focused on ministry, learning, how to pastor, how to do ministry, learning about Scripture and theology, but it was an incredibly intense time in terms of fighting that battle with pornography. My wife is interesting. During seminary, my wife had actually had a sense that something was wrong. And it's so true. I think that there are women out there who have this, they sense that something's not quite right. And my wife thought that I was actually having a real affair, a physical affair with someone. And she would later tell me this. She wouldn't tell me that at the time, but she had this suspicion. She could tell that I wasn't fully present in the relationship. And later on, she would tell me, I thought you were having a real physical affair. She would eventually stumble across stuff in the computer's history, and she found this stuff. And eventually, she confronted me one evening. We were getting ready to go to bed, and she said, "Hey, I found something on the computer. We need to talk." And she just confronted me right there. And in those few moments, my throat went dry. My eyes welled up with tears, and my secret was now out. I had nowhere to run. I was the only one. My children weren't old enough to use the computer at the time, so it was me. And there was a part of me that was saying, "Yeah, thank you. It's out. She knows. It's going to be painful, and I'm going to hurt my wife, but she at least knows now." And we embraced and we talked, and she was very gracious towards me and very. I know that she was hurt. I really know that she was deeply hurt, but she also was very merciful towards me. So I'm thinking this is a breakthrough, and things are going to be different, and my wife knows about it now, and that takes a bit of the burden off, and yet at the same time I really sensed that I was vulnerable still to pornography. I kind of felt like I was still playing this game, and I wasn't real serious about changing, about really having a major shift in my life and in my just that major change. And I'm just kind of thinking, God, my wife knows about it now. It'd be really great if you could take this away now. This would be a perfect timing, because then I don't hurt her anymore. And yet unfortunately that's what happened. She kept discovering it. And whereas there was still mercy and grace, there was a callousness, or there was a shell, I think, that was forming around her, because I think there's only so much that you can take as a spouse, and here she was being hurt over and over again, and so she had to do some things to protect herself. It had gotten to a point where she had decided that she was going to leave me, that she was going to separate from me, and pray that would be the shock that I needed to kind of shake me out of this fog that I was in. And every year, my wife and our children would take this trip to visit with her parents, and they would go away for about a week. And it was a week of just utter anguish and turmoil for me, because I would be at home alone. And in years past, I had just gone into this binge of pornography, and I was no good when they weren't around. And this was one of those times. And this is right in the midst of her becoming aware of my problem, and she's at a point where she's kind of done, and she needs to be away. And so they go on their trip, and I'm at home, and I think I made it a good day or so, just kind of white-knuckling it, thinking that I could make it, and just trying my hardest. and I eventually just kind of spun down into this binge cycle, and I came to the end of a few days of this cycle of binging with pornography, staying up till 2 or 3 in the morning, and I was just kind of at the end of my rope. I'd had enough, and I was saying to God, God, we've been on this ride for all these years, and this has been my deep dark secret. Still, there's only one person on the face of the planet who knows, and that's my wife, and I continue to hurt her. And God, can we end this now? And all along, I'd always sensed that God again was telling me, tell someone, let someone in on your secret, and you'll find freedom. And I was still very much opposed to that, though. I didn't want to disappoint. I knew this would, who would this affect? I mean, so many people, my ministry, my churches, the people, my family. God, this is so big. Can't we do this in a much more subtle way, you know? And finally, I got up enough courage to call a friend. That's what it finally just came to. I threw my hands up and said, God, I will do whatever it takes. And I called a friend. And as a pastor, a person I love and have a great deal of confidence in, and whereas I could never tell this person before, I felt like if there was a person that I could tell, it would be this person. And he came to my home, and right there in the living room of my home, I shared with him this, I confessed this deep, dark secret that I'd never uttered the words before to another human being. And he acknowledged it, and he said, hey, it's a common struggle. There's so many men, you're not alone. And that's really part of the lie, I think, that you tell yourself. I know for many years I was like, man, I must be the only guy that struggles with lust, and I must be the only guy that looks at pornography when nobody's looking, you know? And he said, no, man, this is a common struggle, even among Christian men. I said, really, you know? And I tell you, in those moments, I felt such a freedom and a burden lifted. I can't even describe it with words. It was just an immediate freedom that I felt, and I knew that God was moving in those moments as I spoke those words and as I interacted with my friend. I really sensed that my life was different now. That God was gonna. I wasn't by any means perfect, but I sensed that God was setting me on a journey kind of towards freedom and towards a new life. At the moment in which I was able to confess and share with my friend, that's when I knew everything was going to be okay. And perhaps I had a sense that God was really moving, and I was going to be okay, and there was going to be real freedom when I actually got up enough courage and decided in my own mind that I was going to call someone and say, hey, I need to tell you something. And it seems like once that happened, and once I determined that I was going to confess it and open my life up, there was an enormous amount of peace and of strength and of courage that came at that moment. And you arrive at a point where you have to say, I don't care what it takes. I don't care how painful it will be. I'm going to let God do this work to restore me and to bring me back to real life, because the life that I'm living now isn't the life that I was meant to live. And this is a hell that I cannot live through any longer. And it was a matter of getting to a level of discomfort and sickness, I guess, to say, what are you willing to sacrifice and give up to have freedom? And God was saying, you've got to give up your anonymity. You got to give up the secret. Pornography loses its grip. It loses its power. It loses power when you begin to realize that you are loved and you are significant beyond what pornography has to offer, and that you there's no matter what you do, you won't be rejected by God. And boy, that was amazing. That was powerful. Yeah.